All right, everybody, buckle up, because today we are diving headfirst into some seriously murky waters with this one. We're talking about the Hill Mole.
Ah, yeah, the Hill Mole. A blog shrouded in mystery running for almost 2 decades.
2 decades. Someone claiming to have an inside look at the dirty underbelly of DC politics, spycraft, you name it. It's a wild ride.
If even half of what Mole claims is true, we could be looking at some seriously explosive stuff here. First-hand accounts, historical insights, even potential secrets.
And he doesn't hold back. I mean, just listen to this. From an entry back in 2005, he writes, "No matter how independent you believe yourself, you're always part of some greater plan, especially in Washington, where the fabric of intrigue is so tightly woven there is no such thing as a civilian." Chilling stuff. Almost reads like a warning.
Oh, absolutely. That feeling of being trapped, caught in a web of hidden agendas, it's everywhere in his writing. And it makes you wonder what kind of experiences would lead someone to that conclusion.
Right. So let's rewind a bit. What do we actually know about Mole? Or at least what he wants us to believe?
Well, he's pretty adamant about never having an official role in government or the military. Claims the closest he got to a security clearance was a basic background check for some contracting gig at the Treasury Department.
But he was a bike messenger in D.C. during college.
Yeah.
And this is where things get a little more interesting. He suggests that this gave him almost unlimited access, especially in those pre-9/11 days.
Oh, he paints a vivid picture of that time. Imagine skulking through the darkest corners of the Capitol building, witnessing things most people wouldn't even dream of. It was a whole different world back then. The level of access is almost unthinkable in today's security climate.
He even talks about Senate guards confiscating, like knives and drug paraphernalia from other couriers.
Oh, wow.
It really sets the stage for this feeling that he was privy to a whole hidden world.
Exactly. And what's interesting is how Mole uses that shift, that heightened security after 9/11 as a kind of metaphor. It's like he starts to see those same patterns of secrecy and control everywhere, in government, in the media, even in his personal relationships.
It's not even just about what happens, it's how we come to understand it.
Ex-
And he's obsessed with that. Process, propaganda, psychological warfare, the manipulation of public opinion. He even claims he was trained in some of those tactics himself, which is a little unnerving.
Especially when you consider the kind of techniques he's hinting at. I mean, we know spycraft often involves exploiting psychological vulnerabilities, leveraging information, or even misinformation to influence behavior. And Mole seems to suggest that he wasn't just observing this, he was being groomed for it.
There's this one passage where he compares everyday people to those workers building submarines during the Cold War, each one oblivious to their small part in this much larger, potentially dangerous machine.
Right.
He writes, "The reason is simple. Spies are everywhere, and if the simple worker knew what he was making and how to replicate the process, then he would endanger himself, his family, and the security of the United States of America."
Oh, wow.
It's like we're all just cogs in a machine, whether we realize it or not.
And that's where the paranoia really takes hold. It's like he sees manipulation in every interaction, in every corner of his life. And it makes you wonder how much of this is based on actual insider knowledge versus his own experiences. And let's be honest, maybe a little bit of exaggeration.
Like the time he claims he was trained by U.S. Special Forces
Yeah.
as a teenager.
Wait, while he was in his high school's ROTC program.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on.
It's both intriguing
Wow,
and
a little far-fetched.
yeah, a little far-fetched. And that's the thing about the Hill Mole, right? We're constantly trying to figure out if there's a kernel of truth buried beneath all the, the outlandishness.
Yeah.
Or if it's all part of some carefully constructed persona.
Right. It's like trying to separate fact from fiction in a hall of mirrors. And he does not make it easy.
No, he does not. And believe me, there's no shortage of outlandish claims to unpack here. Like his theories about spies.
Oh, you mean like his whole thing about how most backpackers detained by foreign governments are actually undercover operatives?
Yes. And then there's the whole bit about how to spot a spy in a bar.
Because apparently they can't hold their liquor well enough to mask their inherent fearlessness, which supposedly makes them irresistible to certain people. I don't know what that one.
Okay, so maybe we can file that one under highly unlikely.
Yeah.
But it does make you think, right? About how our own perceptions, our own biases shape the way we see the world. Could we be missing something obvious just because it doesn't fit our preconceived notions of what a spy should be?
It's a really interesting question. And it's something Mole himself seems acutely aware of. He's always trying to decode the world around him to separate genuine human interaction from calculated manipulation.
And he usually seems to land on the side of manipulation.
More often than not.
Which leads us to another big theme that runs through his writing: the allure and the danger of secrets. And for Mole, this seems to be deeply intertwined with his time as a bike messenger, a period he looks back on with this strange sense of nostalgia.
Yeah, he talks about a kind of freedom in those early days, a freedom that gradually erodes as he becomes aware of the hidden machinations at play in DC. It's like the more he sees, the more disillusioned he becomes.
And you can almost feel the toll it takes on him. The burden of hidden knowledge, the paranoia, that constant questioning of motives, it's all there in his writing.
Absolutely. It's almost like he's seeking validation, trying to warn us about something he genuinely believes we can't or won't see.
So what happens when someone so deeply enmeshed in this world of secrets tries to leave it all behind?
Well, in Mole's case, he packs his bags and heads to Berlin in 2008. Berlin. He's drawn to the city's openness, its stark contrast to the controlled environment he left behind in D.C. But even there, Mole struggles to escape the patterns he's become so accustomed to seeing.
So he can't quite shake that feeling of suspicion.
No, not entirely. If anything, it seems to intensify. He's struck by the cultural differences, especially the level of trust Germans seem to have in their government, something he finds both intriguing and unsettling.
He says the Germans are still extreme nationalists, but after World War II, they've had to find new ways of expressing that.
He argues that it manifests in their fetishization of their cities, their brands, things like that, as a way to assert national pride without, repeating the mistakes of the past. It's a unique perspective.
It is.
Though definitely open to debate.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, in true Mole fashion, he warns that this doesn't mean the potential for something darker has vanished.
Of course not.
No. He believes that Germans are still grappling with their history, and that this underlying tension makes them vulnerable to manipulation.
Oh, interesting.
He's got this line: Nazis who become anti-Nazis with such vigor are always to not be trusted.
A chilling thought.
Isn't it? And it speaks to this belief that the capacity for extremism exists everywhere, even in societies that appear open and liberal.
It's almost like he's saying history doesn't just repeat itself, it rhymes.
Exactly. So we're back to that fundamental question. How much of Mole's paranoia is rooted in reality, and how much is a product of his own psychology?
A question we'll be grappling with throughout this entire deep dive, and one that I suspect doesn't have a simple answer.
It's interesting, though, after the 2016 election, something shifts in Mole's writing. It's like everything he's been warning us about suddenly feels way more immediate.
Oh, absolutely. The tone changes, for sure.
Did you get that sense, too?
Totally. Like all those patterns he'd been writing about, the manipulation, the secrecy, it all just explodes. The paranoia ramps up, the distrust gets deeper, and everything starts to feel like evidence.
Yeah, it's like he almost goes from 0 to 60 in the span of a few blog posts, like questioning the motives behind rising meat prices, which, by the way, is a whole other rabbit hole in his blog.
Oh, yeah.
Doc 2, claiming that COVID-19 testing centers were intentionally spreading the virus.
Right.
It's a big leap.
It is. And it actually highlights a pattern you see with a lot of conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
He'll often present both a rational explanation for something and then a completely irrational one, side by side.
It's true. Like, he's battling with himself over which one to believe.
Exactly.
And I think that's where his writing gets really interesting,
Yeah.
because that struggle to figure out what's real, what's true, especially when you're surrounded by fear and uncertainty, it's something we can all relate to.
Absolutely. And it's in those moments, I think, where his writing becomes the most relevant to, well, the world we live in now. This idea of truth being malleable, it's something we all grapple with.
It's like he's holding up this funhouse mirror to society, forcing us to confront our own anxieties about what we believe, where we get our information, who we trust.
It's a good way to put it. And you can really see that playing out in how Mole's focus starts to shift during this period. He becomes less concerned with external threats, like foreign governments, and more fixated on the control of information within America itself.
Right. He goes on this whole rant about the consensus reality generators.
Yeah.
The media, social media, even entertainment, basically anything that shapes public opinion.
Right. It's all suspect.
Yeah, he's convinced that these institutions are creating this echo chamber where anyone who disagrees with the mainstream narrative is silenced, shut down, discredited.
It's like this self-perpetuating cycle of conformity.
Exactly. And he sees something particularly sinister in the way information was controlled around certain events, like the January 6th Capitol riot.
Mm.
He even questions whether the whole thing was intentionally exaggerated to demonize Trump supporters and solidify a particular political agenda. It's like he's directly challenging the official narrative.
Which is a pretty bold move.
It is. And it forces us to ask, who benefits from this particular version of events? Who is being silenced or ignored? And are we, as consumers of information, complicit in creating a version of reality that, well, may be completely false?
It's a really uncomfortable question.
It is, and it ties directly into this larger theme that runs through so much of Moll's writing. The erosion of trust in institutions.
Yeah.
He's not just skeptical of the government. He distrusts the media, experts, academics, anyone in a position of power, really.
It's this pervasive suspicion that permeates everything. He sees ulterior motives everywhere, even in things that seem, on the surface, altruistic. It's exhausting to read sometimes.
I bet, but it also makes you think, right? Like, is this level of distrust even sustainable? Can a society actually function when people fundamentally don't trust the institutions that are supposed to serve them?
It's a huge question, and it's something Millet himself seems to wrestle with, because on one hand, he advocates for radical transparency. The idea that if we all lived completely open lives, like we were constantly being watched, that would somehow combat manipulation and deceit.
Which, I mean, is its own form of paranoia.
Oh, totally. And it really highlights that fine line he walks between healthy skepticism and, well, full-blown conspiracy.
He seems to recognize that tension, too. At one point, he even asks if he's a disgruntled former agent, a skilled fabulist, or just a keen observer of human nature.
It's like he can't even decide himself.
No. But there's this one line that really stuck with me. He writes, "It's the era in America when the tools of hearts and minds warfare are turned on ourselves." It's chilling.
It is, because in a way he's right. Just look at the state of things. The political division, the constant suspicion, the echo chambers we all seem to exist in. It's like we've become our own worst enemy.
It's true. And as much as we might not want to admit it, social media hasn't exactly helped. If anything, it's amplified these divisions, made it easier to exist in these echo chambers, to surround yourself with people who already agree with you.
He's very aware of the ironies there.
Oh, absolutely. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more we distrust each other, the more we seek out information that confirms our biases. And it just creates this vicious cycle.
And that cycle of distrust plays right into the hands of those who benefit from it.
Right, because once you erode that fundamental trust, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild.
Exactly. And then it becomes easier to dismiss legitimate concerns, to silence dissenting voices, to control the narrative. And Molle understands this maybe better than anyone. He knows how powerful fear can be, how easily it can be used to justify policies and actions that might otherwise seem completely unacceptable.
You really see that in his writing about the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, definitely. That's a prime example. He's very critical of the way fear was used to justify lockdowns, restrictions on individual freedoms, the suppression of dissenting voices. It's like he sees this massive power grab happening right in front of him.
And he doesn't know how to stop it.
Exactly. And he's especially critical of the attempts to silence those who question the mainstream narrative around things like the efficacy of lockdowns or the safety of the vaccines. To him, that was censorship, plain and simple.
Which, ironically, is exactly what he was being accused of. Spreading misinformation, undermining public health.
It's
But
a
it's
textbook example.
a textbook example of how easily the language of control can be used against anyone who dares to question it.
Exactly.
But even though he's clearly skeptical of authority, he never completely abandons this belief in personal freedom, individual liberty. That tension is always there. This belief in the individual, even as he rails against the institutions that shape our lives. And I think that's what makes him such a fascinating, if incredibly frustrating, figure to unpack.
He's full of contradictions, that's for sure.
He really is. But in those contradictions, there's something really profound. It forces us to ask ourselves, what happens when our desire for freedom clashes with our need for security? When does healthy skepticism tip over into paranoia?
It's a slippery slope, isn't it?
It really is. And Molle forces us to confront that.
So after spending all this time with the Hill Mole, I mean, where do we even begin to unpack it all?
That's the thing about Molle, isn't it? He doesn't give us easy answers. There are no neat conclusions. It's this tangled mess of observations, theories, anxieties. He throws it all out there, and you're left to make sense of it.
It's like he's saying, All right, here's what I see. Now what are you going to do about it?
Exactly. And that's where the real value of this deep dive lies, I think. It's not about proving or disproving Molle's claims. It's more about using his writing as a starting point to examine our own relationship with truth, with power, with how we perceive the world around us.
He definitely doesn't shy away from a pretty bleak view of humanity, does he?
No, he doesn't. But even within that bleakness, you can find these glimmers of something. Well, something hopeful. A desire for authenticity. A recognition that even amidst all the suspicion and paranoia, we still crave genuine connection.
You really see it in how he writes about his friends, even when he's questioning their motives.
He refers to them as brothers, talks about a fairy godmother, and an Elliott School privateer diplomat free spirit who seem to be constants in his life. These relationships clearly mean something to him, even if he can't quite shake the feeling that they might be compromised somehow.
It's kind of heartbreaking, isn't it? This constant search for connection, but always pushing people away out of fear and distrust.
It speaks to the psychological toll that living in Mole's world takes. Every interaction is suspect, every motive is questioned, and the very act of trusting someone feels dangerous.
He seems to believe that the only way to protect yourself from manipulation is to become hyper-aware of it, to live as if you're always being watched.
He even advocates for this radical transparency, the idea that if we all lived completely open lives, there'd be no room for manipulation or deceit.
Which is an interesting concept, I'll grant you that. But I'm not sure how realistic it is in practice.
Exactly. And it raises all sorts of questions about privacy, about security, about how much we're willing to sacrifice in the name of freedom.
So where does that leave us then? After this deep dive into the mind of the Hell Mole, what are we supposed to take away from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of critical thinking. Mole constantly reminds us that we can't just blindly accept the narratives we're being fed, whether it's from the government, the media, even our own social circles.
We have to be willing to question our assumptions, to seek out different perspectives, to consider the possibility that what we're seeing or we're being told isn't the full story.
Exactly. And maybe even more importantly, we need to be aware of our own biases. How are those biases shaping what we see, what we believe, how we interact with the world around us?
Mole might be a flawed narrator, an unreliable source, but he forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about power, about manipulation, about how easily trust can be eroded, especially in a world saturated with information.
He might leave us with more questions than answers, but isn't that the mark of something truly thought-provoking?
It certainly is. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought from the Hill Mole himself. He writes, "A cigar is never just a cigar. Charm is never incidental."
A good reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the most important truths are the ones hiding in plain sight.
This has been The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time for another plunge into the depths of information.